And that's where we're starting up from, a look at the economy, the fallout from all the policies the president has initiated in the 30 days that he's been in office. I mean, we talked about some of the high points of that period: subsidy removal, floating of the naira, handling of the National Assembly issues, appointment of service chiefs, proposed VAT on diesel, and amongst many other policies, and how all of this weighing on the economy. Also, that other conversation about certain professional bodies that were being funded by the federal government. How would that all work out? If federal government stops funding these bodies, where would those funds be going into? And how is it that those bodies were even being funded by the federal government, yet they still collect dues from their members? But all that will be part of the conversation we're having with Mr. Kyari Bukar, who's the former chairman of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, CEO Africa Operations Inlax Limited, and who joins us virtually from Maiduguri. Mr. Bukar, thank you for joining us. Also joining us is Dr. Paul Ikele, who is the Registrar, Chief Executive Officer, Institute of Business Development, who joins us also virtually from Lagos. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ikele. Let me start off with Mr. Bukar. The Nigeria Economic Summit Group has always spoken about the Nigerian economy over time and proposed several measures that should be taken as regards moving the economy forward. So let's start from that point, and let's hear your overview or your take on what's been going on in the Nigerian economy since this administration took off 30 days ago. Mr. Bukar and Dr. Kellet, well, I wanted to start off from the point of view, let's get your point of view as regards the takeoff point of this administration, the policies that have come in, especially you, Dr. Bukar, because the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, of which you've been a part of, and you headed at one time, has always spoken about the Nigerian economy, how to move it forward, some of the things that should be put aside and some of the things that should be taken on. What is your take on the move so far?
Good morning. The story of Nigeria is changing. The beauty of the things that we've had, as jolting as they were, the directions, generally speaking, are all in the right direction. The speed with which the announcements were made were commendable. Now, of course, naturally, with these, there has to be clarity of those policy pronouncements, particularly even on the FX-related activities. Of course, the reaction of the world is a positive one, overwhelmingly positive all around the world. And it also gives us what I call not only confidence, which is what every paper is mentioning, but it also begins to restore trust of the Nigerian monetary policy and the fiscal stance. Of course, we will talk about the fiscal policies down the road. But the most interesting things are that those are elements of how a tough decision must be made by the very top, which is the president, in executing his policy pronouncements. There are documents, particularly the one by the Policy Advisory Council, indicated all of those. Of course, the timing are perfect. Now, what we need to look at is that, of course, with those announcements and the activities, the implementation, there will be hardship to the economy. But I think it is better to go through the hardship rather than to deny ourselves and bury our heads in the sand, so to speak, and not be able to accomplish much. The last 8 years have been, economically speaking, filled up with uncertainties, somersaults, lack of clarity, and within a few weeks, all of those have now been put into their place. Now, of course, talking about this, there has to be follow-ons, and those follow-ons are going to be the determinant of what we want to accomplish as a nation, because the growth trajectory for Nigeria should be in double digits. And for us to do that, there are certain tough decisions that have to be made, particularly where it comes to, say, for example, implementation of the Orosanya report on the, cutting down the ministries, departments, and agencies within the government, consolidating some of those assets, and in some instances, even reform that would need to be tapped into the PIA, such that NNPC as it is, which is NNPC Limited, being commercialized, it should be separated, but then there are a lot of assets under that need to be gotten rid of, or at least partially privatized, such that private sector management need to come in with proper governance structure to make sure that those are in order. Because if you look at what we have today in the world, in the last year, 2022, top 10 entities globally in terms of market capitalization are either technology companies or energy companies. And that basically indicates that those energy companies, including one from Brazil and one from Saudi Arabia, indicates that even if it is the government-owned entity, if it is professionally and well-governed, the value that it's going to create is immense.
Okay.
So those are some of those components. But then, of course, for somebody in technology, myself, I would also see a faster implementation of e-government. That does a number of things. It brings in efficiency, it reduces costs, and in the process, we will have a more optimal government and streamlined to the extent that the cost of governance overall is going to be manageable in the medium to long term.
Thank you, Mr. Bukar. Let's hear from you, Dr. Ikele, especially considering the fact that before now, Nigeria was considered the poverty capital of the world. And with these new policies, some have described Nigeria, the World Bank report has said that Nigeria has slipped into poverty in the last 6 months, Dr. Ikele. But yet, many will say that Nigeria's economy is headed in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on the program. In fact, Nigerian economic system has been wobbling in view of the implementation of policies. And it's not as if those policies were badly initiated, but during the implementation, it becomes a bit difficult to have them put in place. And that is why decisions and policies of government immediately will start to affect the entire population. Nigeria has a very large population, and Nigeria runs a middle mixed economic system. And in that economic system, Nigeria has two sectors in that economic system. We have the formal system and the formal system. And if you check that economic system, the informal system has about 65% of the entire sector. And it is not properly organized, positioned, so that any little effect or decision or policy of the government immediately has an immediate effect on the population. For example, the removal of subsidies from petroleum, which actually was not captured in the budget of 2023, and it was planned by the then Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Ahmed Zainab, stated that they were removing it from the budget of 2023, and though His Excellency the President, Tinubu, when he came in, announced it during his inauguration, you can see that the effect, the cost, the fuel prices skyrocketed within that short period. And because the informal sector, they don't have a propensity to save. They live on what they work, that some people, based on what they earn today, they spend it. So if there is a gap or a change or a deviation from what should have been coming, immediately it will affect their living standards. And that is why within this scenario, even when, according to the minister, that they were providing palliatives of to 10 million persons, so probably get about 5,000 naira, but that wouldn't even solve it. You see, Nigerians, some of them are living already below poverty level, and any policy that will immediately affect their day-to-day activities will impinge on them, and of course, they will fall into poverty. And with the population, an uncontrolled system of administration, of course, the potency is there that the economy, the population will continue to get poorer. Even the system of governance is quite fine. We have 3 tiers of government. We have the local government, we have the state, and we have the federal government. And in our executive administration, we have the executive, we have the judiciary, we have the National Assembly. And you can see in all these components, from the local government, they are represented up to both the National Assembly and to the executive. Why is there gaps? Why is it that the implementation of policies instantly affect the ordinary man? It's because the flow of those policies is not properly harnessed. Either it will be started at the top level. Before it gets down to the top level, it will not get there. And that is a question of corruption. A question of corruption. Some individuals will make policies and they will be on the top and ensure that they collect whatever they can collect, but it will not get down to the poor person. So, for example, part of the reasons for removing fuel subsidy was that most of our petroleum products are being exported to our neighbor states in West Africa because it is cheaper in Nigeria, and there they make profit at the expense of their citizens. So it is a terrible situation, and I think government should look at it. Government should look at what they can do to correct the informal sector and maybe to create SMEs, micro businesses, and then have a consistent, sustainable record collections to ensure that if there are deviations, it will be neat at the board.
Indeed, I mean, it's certainly, excuse me, having a very, very adverse effect on businesses and individuals, especially at the micro level. But when you look at the macroeconomics of what is currently happening, as Mr. Bukka referred to at the top, on the surface of it, do you think that the reforms that we're currently undergoing, if you want to call them reforms, if you see them as such, do you think that they are necessary to reset certain parameters within the economy? That's for you, Dr. Ekele.
Yes, when you talk about macroeconomy, you are looking at the larger economy, and there must be derivative basis for determining those macroeconomies, and there must be benchmarks, okay, that will build it up to that level. And of course, you see the micro system that developed to that macroeconomy. It is very, very key and important that a systematic approach has to be employed to ensure that all the elements that were being considered is in tandem on the base.
Oh, Dr. Keller, I don't think I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm hearing you. Okay, go ahead. No,
okay, fantastic. Your last response, I was asking your own opinion. Do you think that the current reforms are necessary? I didn't quite get your response on that.
The current reforms. I didn't hear you very well, sorry.
Yeah, I was asking if you think that the current, I don't know if you want to call them reforms or reset button, do you think that, it is a necessary push? Do you think it is important that, for instance, the naira be floated? Do you think it's important that fuel subsidy be taken out, considering just how it has ballooned beyond control? What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that we could still have kept it in place, without, because of the adverse effects it could have, especially at the micro level. What are your thoughts on the larger picture, on the picture at the top? What are your thoughts on it?
Very well. Thank you very much. You see, reforms, the reforms are quite well. But you see, the approach of instilling those reforms is the question mark I have. For example, the fuel subsidies, which had been planned from last year, that from current year, that it will be taken up from the budget. And there were palliatives already planned by the government. And once that is done, immediately the government went ahead and said that naira is going to be floated. And what do you mean by floating the naira? The floating naira is allowing the powers of demand and supply and the foreign exchange market to determine what naira is. Knowing that Nigeria is a mono-economic country, we are only dependent on petroleum products. And these petroleum products are crude products. Nigeria has not attained a level where the byproduct of the petroleum products can be harnessed and utilized. It is still being exported, processed, and brought back to the country. So some of the policies have to be planned to ensure that implementing it will not affect the livelihood of the citizens. Of course, first of the mover, I accept it is the best time, so that the savings government will make will now be utilized to create opportunities, job creation, and then training, ensuring that manpower development is put in place, ensuring that the environmental development of the economy, look at the infrastructures, those savings will be put into it. For example, Nigeria is more or less an agro economy. So we have a lot of agricultural products and services, and most of them are not just produced like that. They need some infrastructure, good roads. They need a way so that those goods and services can be either stored or be processed so that it will add one or two value to the system. Okay. Remember, too, Nigeria have not started exporting any finished products for now. Although we have the potential.
So, Dr. Keller, just a moment. If I get you correctly, you're saying that it is necessary, but not in the manner that it has been done. Is that what you're saying?
That is my point, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let me go to Mr. Bukka then, and, because he seems a bit more optimistic. He thinks that there is clarity. But let me ask Mr. Bukka about the level of transparency. Are we aware of just how in debt we are, or maybe just how bad our economic situation is, and what we really need to, do to get out of it? I don't mean that. I don't just mean the steps that have been taken so far. I mean what these steps are meant to do for our economy, the goals that they should be achieving. Do you think that we have sufficient clarity in that regard?
Let me go back a bit before I address the issue of the clarity. One is that the situation Nigeria has found itself right now, or on May 29th, is you have options. One is to not do anything. And I don't think that is possible. It's not a feasible option at all, meaning you continue to borrow at a very reckless rate. You have multiple exchange rates. You have a fuel subsidy that you cannot underwrite sustainably. Now, it requires political will to do what Mr. President did, which is to basically say, look, it's like a household. You are earning 1,000 naira and your bill is 4,000 naira. You're borrowing 3/4 of what you need to spend every day, it's not sustainable. You have to do something. Certain things has to change. So the decision is great. Now, there is a need for education and clarity and transparency. I think under the circumstances, the presentation, the communication need to be incessant so that people begin to understand and empathize with where Mr. President is. Now, then the second thing is, after these announcements, of course, there is market reactions. Market has reacted. Speaking about what has happened globally, it's positive. What has happened even domestically, the day of the announcement of the fuel subsidy, the stock market rose by, leaps and bounds. But then come down to the nitty-gritty. Now, those are all macro issues. When you now look at how it will affect the average citizen, we do know it's going to be very difficult. I think there were a few newspaper headlines we read this morning, which indicated that even Mr. President is aware that there is going to be hardship. Now, what needs to then happen is how can we meaningfully, efficiently, and efficaciously present palliatives, and those palliatives must go to the right people. It's not a matter of cutting a check and giving somebody money, because that itself is not sustainable. It has been subject to abuse in the past. We all know what had happened in the past. And therefore, we need to come up with solutions. And in some instances, it is better to have what I call social infrastructure, whether it is making transportation cheaper by presenting quote unquote, what I would say, probably a certain form of subsidy for transportation or whatever, or moving of goods and services. In that way, the food inflation or certain specific targeted areas, inflation can be addressed. The other thing is overall the general inflation in the country. Now, the monetary tool that one needs to use to contain inflation is raising of interest rates. And of course, we already have interest rates that are high. So we are in a catch-22 situation as a country. I do not envy any of the economic managers in the, be they on a list somewhere coming in or have already been appointed as SAF to monetary policy and all of that. I don't envy their position, because you have to, you're going to be having a balancing, contending negative forces, or rather counterintuitive forces that you need to deal with in terms of having that clarity of communication that comes out. But some of the things that have been shared and some of the documents that we've seen in terms of the short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans, they are fantastic. And the bane of it is in the execution. And we need to actually go through ruthlessly in terms of collapsing MDAs, merging some, mothballing others. There are some that have outlived their usefulness, and those we need to be candid with ourselves and shut those down. Will that affect jobs? Yes, certainly it will. If we are buying this mantra of hardship, the hardship should cut across both ways, both from the center, meaning the federal government, MDAs, as well as, the way it affects economy. And by the way, when it is open and transparent in terms of FX allocation and all of that, the market becomes efficient. And when markets are efficient, even something as simple as diaspora remittance will probably go to what I would call its natural level, which probably might be around 30 or 35 billion per year inflow coming into the country, rather than the sub 20 billion that we've been seeing in the last 4 or 5 years. So essentially what that means is that Nigeria is going to be open for business. Nigeria become an attractive destination on the continent. Mind you, there is one other thing that had been done across the continent, which Nigeria ought to be in a position to take advantage of, and that is the Africa Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Agreement. Nigeria should be in the center of things in terms of making it so that we will be a hub for manufacturing, we will be a hub for services, and in so doing, the economy's growth trajectory is going to be high. I mean,
Mr. Booker, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure these are the hopes. These are the expectations that people have, that they hope that, these reforms, will be able to bring their way. But I'm sure my colleagues in Lagos have more questions for you. I certainly do have follow-ups, but they need to get their questions through.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. A very important conversation, so you'd understand why we need to really dissect this as much as we can. But let me take this to Dr. Kele. I had a follow-up for Mr. Booker too, but just bring in Dr. Kele in on this one. Because Mr. Booker was talking about the inflation, trying to cut the inflation down. And if you look at the recent, reports, entrenched inflation drove 4 million into poverty in 5 months. And the projection is that if the right decisions are not taken, over 7 million people will be driven into poverty further if the right steps are not taken as a result of the subsidy removal and some of the other policy decisions. So the president just yesterday spoke about, his trajectory, the decisions he's making. And he says, well, he's taking baby steps and he's not in a hurry. And Mr. Booker had said that if there's anything we need to have double-digit economic growth. The projection is that we'll have 3.3% by the end of the year. And that is not the double digit we're looking for. We don't want a decimal point in between the double. We need at least 10. So if the president says, well, I'm in no hurry. And I recall the former president, when he started, there was that term, Baba go slow. And a lot of people were saying, well, we need someone to hit the ground running. That expression has come up time and again. So how do you maybe put that in context? Because a lot of people expect that things will be done in quick succession, will move swiftly. But he says, hey, I'm taking baby steps. I'm in no hurry. Do you understand that fully in the context of where we're in, or you think maybe he means something else?
Thank you very much. Yeah, you see, every government actually has good intentions for their citizens, especially when there are needs, there are gaps. But in the case of Nigerian system or Nigerian scenario, some of those policies comes when its expectation has been, people have lost hope of getting it. And when it comes, it goes into like throwing water in a well that drains up, or using a basket to get water. However, if the government can systematically plan with the system to a sustainable data collection. Of course, we know Nigeria has been borrowing from World Bank, international finance corporations. Can Nigeria look at some of the policies of those organizations? For example, World Bank policy says to end extreme poverty, and again, to build a prosperity in a sustainable way. How can Nigeria key into it? At times, statements made by the president or the governors are policy statements. And it is now left for the aides, for the sector, or for the organization to put that into workforce. My worry is, before those statements are being made, is there a proper study? Is there an analysis? Is there an environmental scanning? The scenario, is it possible? Or is just a white elephant pronouncement? Because you see, the livelihood of the citizens actually matters. In fact, though Nigeria is looking at politics as a business, but to me, politics is not a business. Politics is a service to the system. So if the economy, the citizens are well nurtured, if they are provided for, and they have their day-to-day activities and be able to do those key things, which is their profession, for example, the farmers, the workers, and everybody works and pay to be taxation to the economy. And there is a basic provision. Then, whatever policy the government brings, of course, will flow. That is it. And that is why once some of these new policies come into place, it will throw the entire system into rowdy, and people will be complaining. As we speak now, people are apprehensive that the electricity tariff will increase any moment from now, and people they were advised to go ahead and buy more credit. How, if you have no savings, will you buy and keep? And these things, why is it that plans are just taken at a short notice? We have a planning system. We have a short-term plan. We have a long-term plan. We're talking about macroeconomic issues. So remembering that we are dealing with the populace, Nigerians, of diverse nature.
Okay, Dr. Kelly.
Okay, the segment that might feel comfortable with the incentive, the new decision, are very minute to the larger economic system. Because the majority of Nigeria, like I said, in our economic system, we have the formal and informal system. The informal systems have problems because they are not regulated, they are not cared for, they work to earn their living. And changes in that area can affect their life.
Right.
You know.
If I could just comment now, Dr. Kelly. By the way, the electricity tariff conversation, I mean, what we have now is no approval has been given for that just yet. There still needs to be more clarity, but so far, what we know is that approval hasn't been given, so it looks like that is not going ahead. But let me rephrase that same question this time for Mr. Booker. And I remember you said Nigeria is open for business. Well, let's properly situate the Nigeria that it is right now. For the inflation, which looks like one of our major challenges, right? The CBN, the monetary policy, we've since increased, our interest rate by 700 basis points since last year, mid last year, and I think May last year, thereabout. And the inflation is again not easily explained by the global supply chain crisis. That's the inflation in Nigeria. And you called it a catch-22 situation, sort of. I mean, we've done different things and it looks like it is not quite working. So my question is, regarding the president's statement, what kind of movement do you think the Nigerian economy needs? Do we need quick, swift movement, or as the president says, he's not marching in a hurry? Is that what the Nigerian economy needs right now? Slow and steady or swiftly?
There are things that can be done swiftly. It may not necessarily be directly correlating to some of the items we're discussing. For example, inflation and the effects of inflation are going to be hitting us every day. And in some instances, it requires certain activities that we have to do in the economy to bring down, for example, food inflation, right? Because if the average Nigeria's food on the table, when you look at it, the segment that can be attributed to imported food is probably not as large as one would expect. I'm now discounting the high net worth individuals whose probably food baskets might be on the higher end. But when you look at that, then it means that our agriculture need to be in a manner that is more growing at a faster rate than the inflation rate. And the yield from our agricultural productions also must be sufficiently growing. And where I am, by the way, I'm in Maiduguri, in the northeast corner of the country. Some of the conversations, even though anecdotal, that I'm having with people, especially some of the district heads, is that even a few attempts at going out to the farms are met with security challenges. Now, that is not a good sign in terms of arresting long-term inflation, especially food inflation, when the bread at the food basket of the country is not safe for you to walk out and go and farm. So I think some of the things that have been pronounced, and some of the strategic documents of the government, or rather the party that came into government, indicates to me that the issue of security is important, the issue of agriculture is important. But these are things that take time for one to feel the effect of those. So those are some of the elements. So if we must move fast, we must move fast in addressing the security challenges as quickly as possible. We must move fast in consolidating the MDAs, because there is no reason why the government is spending so much money on operating expenses when you can take certain moves within a period of 90 days, possibly 180 days, you would be able to reduce the cost. The problem with that cost reduction is that you're not going to see it. In fact, it will cost you more money because there is severance payments, and some people would have to also be given additional payments for them to get off of payroll. It means that initially there would even be higher spending. But the long-term effect, we know, is going to be great. So essentially, that's why I said the conversation about inflation is going to be an extremely difficult one. You have to be balancing the macro elements with the micro consequences, plus also what we need to do structurally as a nation to address it. Now, the thing is that all of these will point us towards the medium to long term. And let's not say at the cost of what may affect us today or tomorrow, we should forego the longer term effects. So the rational thing to do is to do the right things. At the same time, we should also be cognizant of the challenges that it presents. And all stakeholders need to be around the table so that they know and the government knows that there are going to be an immense amount of sacrifice that need to come along if we want to build a better country for our children and our grandchildren.
Yes, Mr. Booker, still on the conversation on transparency and accountability from the current administration, it would need to run the economy. And we've been told that debt to revenue ratio is is hovering around 73.5%. And, if you calculate the debt adding ways and means, it's somewhere around over 80 trillion. Should we be asking questions, demanding a huge dose of honesty from the administration about how it intends to run the economy in the absence of, funds, from crude oil sales, which is diminishing, and, harmonizing non-oil sources also?
So two things. In regards to the debt to revenue, we are in a very dire situation. However, if we can actually even take some of those domestic debt elements and securitize it into a long-term bond of some kind, I've seen countries issuing 100 and 120-year bonds. That can do a number of things. One is that, we know we have an obligation to pay, but it would be better to the purse, to the national purse, because it will then substantially reduce that percentage that is so hard for us to do anything. And with the breather, with that space, what we need to do as a nation is to ensure that whatever budgetary allocation or whatever budgetary policy we need to enact in terms of implementation of our budget, capital should actually take more and should also be done efficaciously in a manner that tells everybody in a very transparent manner that, yes, this money is going to road or airport or rail or whatever. And we know these are catalysts for economic growth. And these are the things that if you input, the multiplier effect is so huge, and it generates a lot of small, medium enterprises around those clusters, such that more jobs would be created, more income would be generated in regards to the average citizen, more taxes would be paid, more taxes would be collected if those leakages are also blocked. So essentially what I'm saying is that, yes, we need to be mindful of the challenges we have, but at the same time, we need to do what I would call actualizing that so-called Nigerian word that had been beaten to death, potential. I think what we need to do as a nation is to just, take the bull by the horn and ensure that some of these things just require the necessary political will to do them.
Are you saying that there is still some credit amid the huge debt? Are you optimistic about funds to run the economy?
Indeed. What happens is that once you start doing all the right things, you will get friends, because success is determined by the hard work you put into those things. And when you open yourself up, there will be input coming in. And because with the FX situation, all we need is clarity. How is it going to be done and all of that. And I think the market is finding its way. But when you look at the BOS Securities report or JP Morgan report or one or two others that have come out in the last few weeks, it indicates that certain things in the economy are perceived by potential external investors as the right moves. Now, those are good signals, and we need to capitalize on those. And how you do that, and how you engage and communicate with people that have surplus of funds, globally speaking now, indicates whether it's global or domestic, by the way, because deposit money banks have a lot of their deposits quarantined by the former central bank governor in terms of the discretionary CRR. So even though officially the CRR is 32.5%, for every 100 naira that comes into the bank, 32 naira 50 cents is kept in quarantine in the central bank. That's the official statement. But guess what? The average right now, if you survey the banks, and I don't have the data by the way, I'm just guessing, it's probably around 60%. That means that for every 100 naira, the bank's 60 naira is not with the bank. So, and you're now telling the bank to lend that 40 naira, or to even lend up to 65 loan to deposit ratio. There is no way in edge that somebody can afford to pull those margins. So essentially that's probably why you see high interest rates, and the banks are fearful of having defaults. So in which case they may not end up not even lending at all. And so all of those relief valves would happen. They will have an effect on inflation, but at the same time, they will also be in a position to make us an investment and savings destination. And all of those conflagration of forces can actually put us in the right trajectory of a higher GDP growth. Now, of course, I keep saying that, as a government that cares about the social welfare of the average citizen, there has to be a balancing act on the micro level.
It's good to know that we have some potential, at the domestic level to solve some of these problems. Let me quickly come to you, Dr. Ekele, to find out, first of all, if you agree with him, but also to take a brief look about the conversation on the FX. It's a huge one because of its effects on, the economy at the macro level. All right, I'm told Dr. Ekele is not there. Okay, so perhaps you'll take that, Mr. Booker, as well. It seems as if it will get worse before it will get better, following the floating of the naira. The naira has depreciated. The last check was about 740 naira to the dollar. And, some have said that this would lead to a further dollarization of the economy. And on the flip side, it is said also that economic agents would not want to invest their money in a destination where the naira has, a very weak store in value. What are your thoughts on this?
I think what's going to happen is basically somebody has gone through the BOA securities report. It basically indicates, and it's basically one person's opinion or one firm's opinion. But generally speaking, the way I see it is that it is the beginning of the conversation about whether a foreign portfolio investor or even a foreign direct investor ought to consider Nigeria as a destination versus an alternative market within the African continent. Now, the things that would make a person bring money to Nigeria are the advantages we naturally have, not only just the resources and the raw material and what have you, but we also have a high population, a young population growing, and therefore, if the macro is sorted out well, it means that there would be funds that these people would be using to buy, the essential products and services.
Right.
So essentially, when we look at that, and we look at the fact that there is also a large educated manpower, and therefore all the input resources are in existence, and the market is there, and so essentially it makes us be seen as the right place to be. Now, the signaling that comes from government, the policy and policy clarity,
Indeed,
and the communication and the engagement would basically bring that to the surface, because the fact that the initial pronouncements were accepted doesn't mean that they will then be wiring funds into the country. No.
Right.
They would probably, if you have 100, you might probably send one to see how things happen. And then next you might send 5. And then before you know it, they begin to come in drops.
Well,
I don't see much until probably next year in terms of the inflows as a result of the policies.
Well, some have called this period.
Looks good.
Some have called this period the honeymoon. Some say, well, there's no time for honeymoon for governments at different levels. But I mean, the coming days will be definitely very, very important. I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Karibuka, former chairman, NASG, that's Nigeria Economic Summit Group, and CEO Africa Operations NLAX Limited, joining us from Maiduguri. Thank you so much for your time. We also spoke with Dr. Paul Ikele. The connection is quite shaky, so we've since lost him as registrant CEO of Institute of Business Development. Thank you as well for your contributions in this conversation. We'll take a quick break now, and when we return, our conversation is sort of convergence between the politicians and the people to ensure good governance. You don't want to miss this. Stay with us.